Welcome to the Demystify Technology podcast from the MacLaurin Group.
Typically, you go through the due diligence process. What the world of private equity
Right. Can't wait. Demystify it.
MacLaurin Group's Intimate Conversation series continues with our guest, Justin Marquardt, principal at New Harbor Capital, in our part 2 of the discussion for learning about the process of deals in private equity. Justin continues to share insights about the process, from valuation for investing in a deal to when it makes sense to delay a deal.
As we've gone through this, we talked about your many hats at the onset of this conversation. The exciting world of accrual accounting. But also that strategic aspect where you're working with the founders and the owners to define what is the strategy going forward. And let's understand that we're all on the same page. There's a great deal of complexity around this process. Whether you can turn it around in 90 days or it takes you 6 months to turn it around, that's got to be a bear. It's sitting in your seat to manage because there's so many aspects of that. It's not just the financials, but it's also understanding, is the business considers this intellectual property? Do they really own that intellectual property, or does that really belong to somebody? And there's so many aspects of that you have to manage before you can put that money into the organization. How do you manage that process?
Extremely well.
Just you don't make principle unless you do.
With incredible efficiency. No, you're right. It is. It's a ton of fun too, which is kind of weird, but it is. It's exciting. There's a lot.
You're a total technology guy.
I'm a tech guy. I just want to get in there and code with Alan. But so it can be frustrating at times. It's one of those things that you spend your every day wanting to be in.
Yeah.
And then when you're in there, sometimes you're like, well, I want to be out of this, But it's just, that's the way that this job works. So we love doing what we do, and it's fun. But it's complicated. There's a number of different work streams that have to get done. And while we're able to leverage really, really great partners, service providers that help us with the diligence, like you guys on the tech diligence, there's just, even when you're handing it off to a really competent, capable law firm or accounting group or whatever else, as a consultant, you absolutely can't just assume it's going to get done and that I'll be told when it's ready or whatever. You got to be very involved in weekly check-ins and multiple times a week, depending on what it is, and problem solving and troubleshooting. And maybe that's because something's been uncovered that isn't as it should be, or maybe it's because we can't get access to something just because it doesn't exist, or it doesn't exist in the form that would be most readily usable to answer the question we have, or whatever. Maybe the team that's helping us got delayed on something else and we don't know about it because they're working directly with the company, and that type of thing happens all the time. But whatever it is they're doing, we need finished before we can move on to the next thing, and I've got the next person lined up to do the next thing, but they can't do it until this person's done. So that's why I use the joking analogy of traffic cop. It really is a lot of that. It's a lot of just done it enough times to know kind of what the steps are, where we need to get to, what it looks like in between, and that gives you a sense for when you're behind and what to do. Right? Sometimes you're behind and you just got to let it be behind because people are doing everything they can, and it's just that's the deal process. And sometimes you got to jump in and make it move faster, or cut through and say, hey, we don't need that. Let's focus on this, or let's put that on the back burner. But it's just it's a lot of things to keep track of. It's a lot of email traffic. When you're getting a huge volume of emails and phone calls and text messages now, it's hard to maintain vigilance on each one. And it's inevitably it's the one that you didn't read fully that had a really important point on the 5th paragraph. It's a lot of coordination and collaboration to get there.
Given the urgency and the stress, I would have to associate that more with air traffic control than traffic.
I like
that's true.
Air traffic. I like that. Yeah.
You only need one.
But I don't get a whistle if I'm an air traffic controller.
True.
And that's my most effective tool. So we'll have to put them together.
So we've talked a bit about the process in evaluating an organization, the time and the complexity that goes into that.
Yep.
How do you determine the valuation of an organization that you're considering?
Obviously, that's a huge part of what we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's a relatively complicated area of what we do. It's the most technical part of the job, so it's hard to summarize quickly. I won't go through the various different methodologies we use from finance methodologies that look at the business and the cash flows of the business from different angles that help triangulate to a value. I won't go through what they are. It doesn't really matter. I mean, they're standard. Everybody uses them. The only reason you get different answers in doing so is because you could put different inputs in, right? You can have a different view about how fast the business can grow or how much it's going to cost to scale certain things or other businesses you could leverage or add in or whatever else. So the outcomes can be really different depending on who's doing the analysis and all that, but the methodology is the same. And the market is efficient and pretty smart, so in the end, people get to close amount. I mean, sure, there's always outliers on everything, but the credible parties are, if there's multiple parties evaluating it, are typically going to be very similar in their view. The key part, I think, for a founder or business owner to focus on is the multiple method, right? That's one of the methodologies. The way it's done is you look at typically the trailing earnings of the business. I say typically because sometimes certain businesses you actually would value as a multiple of earnings in the future. So maybe if it's the middle of 2019, maybe it's appropriate to look at trailing earnings as of the end of this year or maybe even the end of next year. That's not done because you really like the business or because the business is really growing fast or something great about the business. Like, founders are always confident in their forecasts, and that's great. They should be, and we like to see that, but it's not done because you're confident. It's only done in certain instances where that revenue is already in the bag, essentially, right? You've pre-sold it, you've got contracts that say, this is all definitely coming to you, and the only reason it isn't in your current trailing revenue is because you haven't fully done the service yet that you're obliged to do and that they're obliged to pay for, and maybe they've already even paid for it. Put aside those because that is it's less common. It's typically done on a trailing basis, and then it's a multiple of that. So if you make $1 in the last 12 months, you made $1 of earnings. EBITDA is a metric of earnings. It looks at different components, but ultimately it's basically earnings. If you made $1 in the last 12 months in total, you would multiply that by a multiple, let's say 5 times, and now your business is worth $5. The multiple itself is in part derived from some of these other valuation methodologies and in part derived from market comps. So just like selling a house, how do you figure out what your house is worth? You go on Redfin and look what the other house is sold for. You don't look at what the other houses are for sale for, per se. I mean, you can look at that and factor that in, but it doesn't really matter what other people are selling their house for. It matters what people have sold their house for. And so we keep lists of that, and investment bankers and other industry professionals that we're connected into have lists of the transactions that have occurred in the space. And so that gives you a sense for, in general, what's the ballpark multiple. Every business is different, especially in the lower middle market with small businesses. So it's just not the case that, the average of those is always the right number, or that the highest is the right number or the lowest is the right number. It's nuanced, and that's why we do the other methodologies as well as a ton of diligence, and that helps inform how we adjust. But the point is the multiple in general is based on what others pay, what others have paid for similar businesses. The one thing I would mention, just on the topic of valuation, that we get a lot of questions from founders around, or can sometimes be a interesting discussion where speaking almost 2 different languages sometimes, because business owners are really focused on the great things that are going to happen in the next year or 2 or 3. Sometimes they're confused why I'm giving them a multiple of the last year, because who cares? That's done. Like, it's this year that matters. And again, putting aside the instances where, from a certainty standpoint, that does make sense to look at forward earnings. Founders should keep in mind that the fact that it is a multiple does countenance the future, right?
Yeah.
Because if I was just paying you for last year, I would pay you what you made last year, right? Why would I pay more, right, than what you made last year if all I get is what you made last year? We're paying a multiple because it's saying in the future you're going to get even bigger, and every year we hope that you're going to generate at least as much as this, and so it's worth more than just one slug of what you did last year. And to the extent that next year is really going to be a big year and we're all convinced of that, the multiple goes up. So if it was 5, maybe it's 7 times, because we were convinced that next year the business, instead of making $1, is going to make $3, and that's a lot. And so we factor it in that way. And it's not just us making it up and saying, how about 7 times? The methodologies, the other ones I talked about, really help inform where we can go and what's fair and reasonable. But it's a nuanced point. I only bring it up because it's one that we get a lot of questions about, as to why are you looking at the last year and why are you multiplying it times that.
And there's also the part of, you get a better multiple. Well, you better deliver too as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the case that if we paid more that we're going to be bad partners, right? We are willing to pay something, it's because we think it's fair in the end, and we're going to be good partners. But it does make the attractiveness of the opportunity from the whole team's perspective, and from what you can expect to do in the future, what resources you're going to get, and all the rest. It puts heightened pressure on the team to really perform, because if you overpay for something and the business isn't living up to its expectations, then there's concern that we're not where we should be. And in this business, when things are going well, basically unlimited, probably shouldn't say unlimited, but there's a lot of incremental investment dollars that can be put behind a business that's on plan and on path, whether it's for new hires or M&A or whatever the investment management plan calls for, or what the founders thought was the right strategy, and where we're at that moment. There's a ton of incremental resources. We're not designed as a VC firm where we're going to keep making investments per se, but if things are going well, those dollars can be procured to continue to support the business. If things are not going well, we stick with our businesses and we ride through it with them, and we have dollars available to support the business if it needs it. But there's less flexibility to do really cool, exciting stuff if the base business is falling behind expectation, because naturally there's more reticence that this isn't working like we thought. We paid a bunch of money for this business and it's falling short of expectations, so anybody would be more reticent to throw more dollars in for really cool expansion projects if it's not panning out to expectations. And so that limits the amazing upside potential to some degree. It doesn't need to be that way, because the founder, owner, seller has a huge impact in authoring what the plan is. When we're building out our valuation model that helps inform what we can pay, we're building it in part with inputs from the founder group and what they think they can do. And so to the extent they're setting up false expectations, then it's going to create difficulties later, or at least create situations where the company's falling short when in reality it's actually probably doing great. It just doesn't have the acumen to do what was promised.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point, especially given that we're in a very competitive landscape with buying of businesses. To that point, for the founders that are looking for investment, that maybe the deal doesn't go through. Does that mean for them, because what they're hearing about is the competitive market and other folks' success, and now their deal doesn't go through. Is that the end? Is that game over? What does it mean to a founder who may not have been successful in a process?
All of this really, it's highly varied, right? So it's hard to give a single answer. I mean, typically it's not over. It could be. If it's something where you needed to raise funds or you're out of business.
Right.
I was talking actually last week to somebody who was in that situation. That's not really what we do, so I'm not equipped to really help with the turnaround thing anyways, but it was a friend of a friend, so I took the call and just was trying to help him think through it. But he had waited too long, and even if I was a turnaround person, which we're not, nobody could get him the money he needed fast enough, at least not in a structure he'd want. So that can happen, but for the most part, I think the key is you need to evaluate why it didn't work, right? Is it because there's something about the company that made it unattractive to an institutional investor? That could be things like you're not appropriately classifying your employees, and you're calling them 1099s, but they're really not, and nobody would think they are, and things that you shouldn't do, but maybe you can get away with as a small business founder, but as institutional capital, we're full stop, no way we're going to do that. And that's not just us. I mean, any institutional capital would approach it that way. And so that could be something that until you fix, maybe you can't sell, or some other issue that you need to get resolved. It also could be that your expectations are off, right? That we do see founders that have friends that are business owners and things in the news as well about valuations, and they get excited that their business is worth a certain amount, and sometimes it's true, sometimes it's not true. And so if it doesn't work because of that, you maybe need to level set a little on what the business is worth so you can be successful. But we've also seen it where the deal falls apart. We've been extremely fortunate that almost none of our deals have fallen apart that we've signed a letter of intent on. It does happen rarely, but in those instances when it does, especially if everybody's being honest with each other and it's just things didn't pan out as everyone thought they would, and genuinely thought they would, which sometimes happens, again, rarely, but it does. In those instances, we've had success in keeping that relationship going, kind of everybody. We really are big advocates of making sure that we're not dragging anybody to the finish line, and that we're not being dragged to the finish line if things aren't working. And again, it's rare, and it's not the typical path. If something fundamentally problematic has occurred or is uncovered or whatever, and it's something we got to work through, there's always opportunity to continue to dialogue, maybe to hit the pause button while that issue is addressed, or to let the management team go back and focus on the business for a while to grow out of that situation or grow into a different situation or what have you. and keep the relationship alive. And that's a key part of how we view the world, because as we talked about at the outset, having the right partner, someone who actually is going to work through things with you, that's what will make these deals successful. We bring that approach from the very beginning of engaging with a company and through the entire diligence process. It's not a gotcha game. We're not trying to find a reason for it not to work by any means, just the opposite.
Yeah. Wanting it to work.
We want it to work, and so if it can't, if it's just nothing that can be done at that point, and again, that's extremely rare, but if it does happen, we work really hard to make sure that we try to lay out a plan B that allows it to come back around, when everybody's ready to refocus.
And I think here at MacLaurin, we have several clients who they didn't get through their first round of seeking investment. They took the opportunity to look at it, much like you said, from a strategy session and where you would take the company, and look at it from I have this new information. I hadn't taken the time to step back as a founder and evaluate from this lens. Now I have, and be able to then take the company with all that information that they've had and be hugely successful, even more successful in the second round of looking of investment, and in many ways are in the timing of everything aligning or better off in that second round. So appreciate you giving that perspective. Thank you so much for being here and meeting with the folks that you've done today. We really enjoyed the time, and I know that the folks who have gotten to meet with you today have been tremendously appreciative of your time. So thank you.
No, it's been a great pleasure. Thanks for having me out.
Thank you.